Hey traders, Raghee here. And in this recap video, we're going to cover the currency that's got my attention the most today, and that's the Canadian dollar. We had the Bank of Canada today in terms of economic events. We had the BOC rate statement, overnight rate. No adjustments were made to the rate, but ultimately what I'm looking to see is a volatility event, and the kind of volatility that was going to serve us best, whether that be the dollar Canada on the Forex side of things, or whether that be the Canadian dollar futures, so the CD, the June contract for the CD, the Canadian dollar. I'm looking for Canadian dollar weakness, ultimately, to buy into. And this is a trade that is going to utilize what has been a pretty reinvigorated Canadian dollar, and also what I still believe is going to be a consistently weaker US dollar. So anytime you're playing currencies, you're actually playing two. You're never playing a single currency. You're either playing a basket, say when you're looking at dollar index futures, or you're looking at one currency versus another. And most of the time I'm looking at Forex, but there are a number of Forex futures that you can trade. So this doesn't leave my futures traders in the dust. In fact, anytime I'm trading a currency versus the US, you will have a good liquid alternative. So let's talk about this in the biggest marketplace for currencies, which is the Forex. This would be a short of the US dollar Canadian dollar, which is shorting the first currency, which is the US, and buying the second. Now, you don't have to worry about all that. That's happening automatically when you short dollar Canada on your platform. The trade is going to get very interesting now. Let me zoom in to where my attention is waiting. And this is the 5-minute. The 5-minute's interesting because I wouldn't call this a day trade. Not at all. What this is watching how and when the shift from the bullishness post in this pair, the bullishness post the Bank of Canada, and now it seems to be a shift of psychology and some bearishness, how this might indicate the path to strength for the Canadian dollar. And what I'm looking for is this market to head consistently lower through the 2630 level. We're already printing the red grab candles, and this is a great example of what I call an intraday rollover. It's literally a shift that happens from the bullishness here to the transition of what I would expect to be bearishness. And this would serve really well. This would serve us really well. Again, it's a US dollar short, Canadian dollar buy, and this would serve us really well to take advantage of a pretty interesting narrative that's reappeared today, and that is the NAFTA narrative. So expectations are that we're going to revisit NAFTA, we meaning the US, Mexico, and Canada will revisit NAFTA within the next 3 weeks. And anytime there is any kind of news of potentially a NAFTA deal, that has strengthened the Canadian dollar. It wasn't but about 3 weeks ago that the Canadian dollar was one of the weakest, if not the weakest, currency story in the world of the major G7 countries. And then within just a few tweets over, I believe it was Easter weekend, we went from the weakest currency to one of the strongest, top 3 currencies. And this has, really been a sharp about face, where before I was focusing on Canadian dollar shorts, and now I'm focusing on Canadian dollar buys, specifically against 2 currencies. Dollar Canada is going to have the broadest appeal. It's the most popular way in which traders will trade the Canadian dollar, and it's available to be traded in ETFs via the FXC, via the futures contracts, obviously, Canadian dollar futures, Forex, options. So there's a lot of alternatives here to play this, but also Australian dollar, Canadian dollar is giving us a very similar 5-minute shift, where the Aussie has suddenly become one of the weaker currencies. And whenever you're playing currencies, any kind of pairs trading, the thing you want to capitalize on is the contrast of weakness versus strength, which is why we're focusing primarily on the weakness of other currencies longer term US dollar, even Aussie, versus what right now is the 1 month relative performance leader in the loonie. So you can see exactly why I want to buy this thing. And those are the two setups that I'm looking at right now on the heels of today's Bank of Canada announcement, which was no change in rates, but a lot of Canadian dollar weakness that ultimately we want to get opportunistic about and buy.